Morning team, Macho Models here with the X29. So I've done, as you can see, I got all my chipping done and I've been working with the oils for the past couple days, and it's been a lot of fun to work with the oils. And before this video begins, I can't encourage you enough to start looking into getting into oils. I'll talk to you a little bit more towards the end, kind of the big why, but the big compelling sell for you up front is it is intimidating. It takes a little bit of time to get to work, but I'm hoping that showing you guys this video and working on this back section right here may give any of you guys who are a little bit apprehensive about oils or just not sure, a little bit of confidence boost to get into it, because it's an awesome effect. And a little bit more actually about the why up front. I probably shouldn't bury the lead. Is you'll notice with a lot of these streaks, let me say this up front. Any of these paints, pigments, they're all tools that can be used in a plethora of different ways. This is just one way. I happen to prefer this way for streaking over some other methods that I've tried. And some of those other methods are working with pigments. I've tried to do this a little bit with acrylic, but acrylic paint does not respond like this. But I truly feel that oil is the best medium to try to apply all this stuff, and it's really not as hard as you might think. All right, before I jump into the tutorial, I wanted to give you guys a 360 tour because I'm guaranteed to forget to do this toward the end. So this is the right side of the model, and this is the left side of the model. So on the left side, you can see this, if you remember from the earlier videos that I posted about decals, this is where I screwed the pooch on putting the decals. And I really like how this section has turned out so far. I like how this section turned out. Coming back to it this morning, I'm actually not a fan of the darker area on the top of the wing. So I'm going to come back this morning and see if I can throw down some thinner and maybe clear this up a little bit. I really like this deep gouge that I put in, and this is where there was a break in the decal, and I like this. This is very visually interesting to me. And you can also note that, like, if you look at the decal, the break is almost hardly not visible. I like some of these other ones. This one is probably a little bit heavier. I'm going to come back today and see if I can clear that up a little bit. These turned out pretty well. I decided to skip on the canards any type of the streak weathering. So this streak weathering is actually representative. So within a wing, you're going to have all these hydraulic lines running. So it's kind of hard to probably see on camera, but when I zoom in, it'll look a little bit different. But this is actually tinted brown. So hydraulic fluid is a bit more brown. And in theory, there's a number of hydraulic lines running through the aircraft wing. Probably to this extent, I don't think so, but I think it's conceivable to say that there was a hydraulic lake right here, and if this thing took any shrapnel, the hydraulic fluid would be, coming out of it, especially if it was on, towards the earlier part of its mission. And then on this side, you can see, I like these effects, but probably over here by the wing root, there wouldn't be a hydraulic line. I would imagine they'd all be back by the flaps. So if I could probably do it over again, I would have not streaked that. And kind of the same thing too, I think I might have over-streaked just a little bit. So you can see almost every little bit of damage that I have, there's a streak coming out. But that being said, and actually maybe I'll cut here in a second and I'll show you a close-up of kind of my my template for all this. I am going to come back with some pencils, maybe some acrylics to add another layer of weathering and damage. Cool, so this is showing up on camera. As you can see, I cut just a moment ago to kind of show you where I've been mapping and planning out a little bit more damage. I started to kind of play around with the pencil a little bit, and you can see these tiny little dots here. So for that, I'm using just a colored pencil that I picked up at the art store. I'll pull back, maybe this is a little bit harder to see, but it's just simply a black pencil, and I have a gray and a white one as well. And when I'm done with all of my oil work, I'm going to try to come back and replicate these kind of smaller dots just to show a little bit more visual interest. Looking at this now, I played around with it a little bit yesterday before I hung it up on the bench. This is probably a little excessive, so I'm going to see if I can come back with an enamel thinner and pull some of these off. But just to kind of give you an idea about where I'm going with all this. So the project this morning and the tutorial that I'm going to show you guys is how to take all this chipping damage that I've done and go ahead and put oil into it. And one of the objectives going into it, as I mentioned in one of the earlier little cuts here, I don't want to necessarily streak everything, so I'm going to try to my damnedest, but wash, I know I'm going to just go ahead and streak everything to try to leave maybe some of these points up here, maybe some of these smaller chips, and just have them simply be holes. So I definitely, though, for this big hole, I want to leave a really long dark streak that goes along the end. And same thing too with this other larger hole. I want to try to make that a prominent visual point. And then these smaller ones, the nice part is with this little bit of paint damage, if you put a little bit of thinner and a little bit of oil when you drop it in here, it almost acts as like an enamel wash, and it'll fill that little hole really well. So I will cut here in a minute. I'm going to try to do this on camera with you guys with my brushes. All right, I lied. I didn't show you guys what I'm actually using. So I'm going to pull back and I'm going to talk to you about what are all these little tools that I've been using and just some of my thoughts on it. So from the top, this is one of the coolest parts about working with oils. You can see I have my palette covered. I will go ahead and pull this off now. I've had this sitting out since last week on Friday. So this has been out for 7 days and the oil is still workable. Granted, it's getting a little long in the tooth when I push into it. It's definitely giving me some resistance. So I'm hoping that this day will probably be the last day that I use oils. But what I did here, it's relatively simple. I cut out a bunch of pieces of cardboard, and actually I have some, I pulled some from my right side, which is like my quick access area, but over on my left side is where I have all these drawers set up, and on the left I have the same version, but with a piece of tape on the back, which is an awesome tool. I do not have a piece of tape on this, so you can see it kind of slides around a little bit, which is, it's fine. It didn't really bother me too much, but when I'm doing a heck of a lot more oil applications, I think it'll add up. And I'll get into each of these paints here in a second. I'm going to just keep going to the right and just blast through this real quick. And then on the left is where I have my paint brushes. So these are the ones that actually come into contact with the oil. And then on the right, I have all of my clean brushes. So these are the ones that I dip into my odorless thinner, and then I pull away any streaks or any oil that I don't want. And on the left, I've got a couple different brushes. I actually didn't end up using, and mind you, a lot of this comes from kind of the Mike Rinaldi school. He'll use, this brush will be his brown brush, this brush will be his black brush, this brush will be his white brush, and then he'll blend into it. And it's a very imperfect science, but he tries to keep the colors separate. I actually ended up, I probably should have done that in retrospect, but what I mostly did was I would take my number 1 brush. I found that I used my number 1 a ton. Mike Rinaldi used his number 2 a lot. I just didn't feel comfortable with it as much as I could have. And you can kind of see the difference between the two brushes. Let me bring the light over here a little bit more. So yeah, and so the number 1's on the right and the number 2 is on the left. I really like the fine point on the number 1, and I found it was easier for me to work with. So what I would do is I would come into here and I'd start, and this is a Starship Filth. So actually, let me go ahead and talk to that. So I have Starship Filth there as my base, but then I went to the art store a while ago, and I think y'all followed me there, and I ended up just getting a bunch of Winsor & Newton, these oil colors. These are their nicer line. They're a little bit more premium. I think I paid $5 a tube for them, but they're going to last me forever. I really can't envision a scenario in the long run working with small scale models where I run out of these. And I have a whole bunch, but I just opted to keep it relatively simple. So I have from darkest to lightest-ish, I have a black. This is my Starship Filth. I have a gray, I have Burnt Umber, and then I have Burnt Sierra, and then I have a little bit of white here for blending and brightening up things. And what I would do is, I have my odorless thinner over here, I drop it into this little dish, and then come back, and then just start ever so slightly pulling it. And I'm barely, I'm probably on the last half or maybe a third of the brush actually letting oils kind of come into contact with this. Otherwise, I'm trying to avoid letting the oils go all the way down to the tip right here, which I want to call it a hilt from a sword, but I know it has a proper name, and I'll come back and try to figure that out. So in application, since we're about to jump into this in a second, I have, and by the way, I just have this Winsor & Newton odorless thinner. Mike Rinaldi talks about spend a little bit of money on this. Don't use hardware store stuff. Hardware store stuff will chew right through paint. So this is the one that was sold alongside of the oil paints, and it seems to work out pretty well. Another really rad part too, much like the oil paints, this odorless thinner has been sitting out for a week and it's still 100% workable. Admittedly, all these little dark areas around here, I got to kind of dance around it, but it's 100% still workable. So how do I load up my brush? And this is an important part about working with oils and probably acrylics as well, just trying to do work with less versus putting more onto your palette. So what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of bringing this up to the edge, and if you notice, it barely pulled up into that. And then when I come back to it too, I'm careful to figure out where the starting point is, and I just ever so slightly dip and load my brush. And then I'll go ahead and I'll pull some off before I come back to the towel. But I'm really looking for, I don't want this to be soupy. I really want this to be nice and lean. So now I've got my painting brush loaded up with a little bit of oils, I'm sorry, a little bit of thinner. Now I'm gonna go ahead and put some oil on. And this was my process. So since we're gonna be working with the intersection of the X29, where I would imagine this would be exhaust, especially closer towards the outlet for the aircraft, I'm going to go heavily black. I'm not going to add, these are the colors I would add when I'm working with hydraulic fluid, and these are going to be the colors that I'm going to work with for exhaust. So I go ahead and I put a little bit of the thinner down on the oil just to start breaking it up, and I'll go ahead and pick these two sections here for gray and for black, and then I'll just let it set for just a moment. And if it's not working, I can come back. I've got this little AK interactive paddle for a kayak. I can just go ahead and come in and just kind of pound it a little bit, and you can see it's still pretty workable. It's getting a little gelatinous, but hopefully it'll last me for the next couple days while I wrap the X29. And then I like to use t-shirts that I've cut up. Paper towels work just fine too, but I find that paper towels don't lay that flat. I'll go ahead and break this up a little bit. And then for the next phase, let me just go ahead and I'll zoom in a little bit to show you how I load up the brush. Alright, we've got a lovely close-up of the oil paints here. I'm just going to come back now on the sections where I laid down a little bit thinner. You can see it's a little bit more glossy than over here where it's a little bit matte. And I'm just going to go ahead and add that Starship Gray. And that's awesome, that giant little peak just fell down. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to add some black. And this is looking pretty good. This is actually a great start. So, I saw a big clump there. Okay. And I'll come here and I'll give you guys a close-up of what this thing looks like. So come in here. So that's it. You can see just towards the tip right there, towards the bottom third is where I have my oils on board. It's really important not to overdo this and to put a ton of oils on here. So this is actually the perfect amount to be able to start painting. And I'll cut here in a moment. I'll show you how I'm going to go ahead and load it up within the X29. All right, one quick note before I start putting paint to aircraft. I didn't touch on this. The reason you use cardboard is that you can see the stains around where I put each of my little oil marks. That's actually to pull the linseed oil out. So linseed oil is the enemy of quick drying. Let's go ahead and say that. If I'd left the linseed oil on here and put it on the aircraft, it more likely than not would have dried with somewhat of a sheen, and the dry time would have taken a lot longer. And I'm sure there's benefits to that, but a lot of the dry times that I'm working with here are from, 6 to 12 to 24 hours. It's my understanding that with the linseed in, that would take a lot longer. I also imagine, too, with more of the linseed oil in, it's probably a little bit harder to work. And you'll see the kind of working quotient here in a moment when we start putting paint to aircraft. All right, so we're going to start putting a little paint down. Admittedly, this is a little precarious with the camera, so I'm going to probably make a couple small adjustments as I go. So I'm going to start with this number 1 brush up here towards the top, and I'm simply going to just go ahead and dot this area right here and fill it in. And I'm just going to start filling in these little holes, and what I'm looking for is on the holes I want 100% coverage, and then ideally to the right where the streak is going to go I want a little extra. So I'm going to come back here and just add a little bit more zhuzh, and that's a perfect start for a streak. And I'm going to go ahead and do this one. I can feel my paintbrush is, it's good, there's enough oil, but I might come back here in a second and add. And I'm going to go ahead and fill some of these smaller dots too. I'm going to fill these dots. Okay, brilliant. That looks like a great start. So if I wasn't on camera, I would just go ahead and press through and add all these dots, but just for sake of demonstration purposes, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next phase. So now I have a brush that isn't loaded up, so this has no enamel thinner. This is a number 2. Let me go ahead and get a number 1 actually. And I'm going to go ahead and add some enamel thinner off camera, and then I have a, you can see in the background here, I'm going to go ahead and unload it just a bit. And then this is where I'm going to start working the oils. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start setting up my streaks. And I can tell there's a little too much thinner on that one, so I'm going to pull that back. So I'm going to start just pulling this back behind the aircraft like this. In this phase, you don't have to worry about it. The only thing I'm really looking for is I don't want to pull. I want to see if I got a nice darkish streak. So sometimes I've done this where I've almost like made it translucent, and that's not the effect that I'm looking for right here. I'm going to pull back this one. So that's a pretty good start. I'll twist it back on camera. So this is where I want to leave my streaks right now. I'm going to go back to my t-shirt and pull whatever little oil that's off there. I'm going to grab a tiny bit of thinner and then pull that off. And now I'm going to start working it. And the first section I like to do, which is a really quick, easy win, is to get rid of the oil that's on the front side. So that one is relatively simple. You just have to go ahead and dot this. And then I'm just looking to track right up to where I actually put the physical damage. And that looks pretty good. Let's see how it looks on camera. Yeah, that's not too bad. Maybe up here towards the top I can pull that back just a little bit. And then, so you can see this looks pretty good. I'm hoping this shows up on camera. I'm going to give that, you're going to watch this dry and evaporate pretty quickly. You can see over here, there's a little bit of streaks. It's not really going to matter in the long run, but just for the demo purposes, I'll go ahead and pull that away. So you can see that went away really quick. And then I just very quickly go back to my t-shirt. And then I go ahead and unload the brush and I can come right back and start working this again. So then the next phase is working this line. So you can see the line sucks, the one that I painted. But if I just kind of come back ever so slightly and patiently, I can just really easily pull back any of that enamel thinner that I got. And I'm going to rotate the aircraft. Another really big helpful piece is this rotational base. It is awesome for working with stuff like this because one angle, working this on camera is quite difficult. Pull back. That looked perfect. That was awesome. So that's a nice flat even streak. It's not really warbly like my hand. Cool. This is looking great. All right, that one's pretty good. I got a little too much enamel thinner. I'm gonna go ahead and we'll just work this one streak, and I'll show you guys my technique and how it worked. Okay. This is good. Why don't we just focus on these two so I don't bore you all to death. And that looks okay. The tail there kind of stinks. I want it to be nice and sharp. Yeah, that's good. Okay, and you can see I'm just coming back here and just putting a tiny bit of enamel thinner on the end of my clean brush. And then I come back to the aircraft and then I just start to kind of pull this away. And I just noticed too that this streak is a little high. That's okay. I can just go ahead and clip it off, right? It doesn't matter because I can always come back. That application was really quick. And the other kind of cool byproduct too is you can see it's kind of gunky and messy over here. If I want to, I can come back and clean that up, or I can leave it in for another weathering effect. So that's pretty good. That's actually, those are pretty okay streaks. I can see there's a little tiny hair in here, so I can push that away. So that was a demo of how I get those smaller streaks. I'm going to go ahead and cut. I'll see if I can set up the camera where I can do a time lapse and show you guys how I'm working this in real time, because I'm going to come back. This was just a demonstration for these two, but you'll notice if I'm able to record this on a time lapse in a comfortable position that I'm going to go ahead and hit all of this and then kind of start streaking it in bigger motions versus doing each of these individually at a time. If I did it like this, it would take forever. But this is, again, I think a pretty good demonstration of how you can put some oil down and then just kind of quickly get some good, realistic looking streaks out of it. Okay, so through the power of the internet, I am done with that small section, and I'm pretty happy. This turned out well. Some notes here. I'm probably, now that I'm looking at this, I want to go back. You can kind of see this one little streak that's going off that way. So that doesn't flow with everything else visually, right? Everything else is kind of triangulating along the wing root. So I'm going to go back and fix that. I'm also going to go back to the best of my ability, and I'm not going to spend too much time because I've already probably spent about 20 minutes on this section. And I'm trying to really eliminate any spots where it's ahead of the dot. So if there's weathering or streaking to the right, that's good. If it's to the left, that's bad. And I did a pretty good job of cleaning up a lot of these and clearing the way for them. And mind you, we're really zoomed in. I really like how these big streaks came out. So off camera, and I apologize, I couldn't jockey all this with the camera over my shoulder. It was really uncomfortable. I actually ended up just picking up the X29 and working with it with my hands, which worked out a heck of a lot better. I ended up painting a lot more black oils right here. So you can see up until about this point, I actually just physically painted it, and then I came back with a clean brush and then just started kind of pulling it back until I got the effect I like. And now that I look at it too, I can see it's kind of pooling like these two smaller dark dots. So I'm going to wait for this to dry just a tiny bit. I'm going to see if I can get rid of those two dark dots so it's a better transition. But I really like how this turned out. Mind you, there was a broken decal and it's still kind of visible here, but what I'm trying to do is just put a little camouflage so if somebody glances at it, they're like, oh, that's visually interesting. The back of the aircraft took a shot, and they may or may not notice this huge decal break. But this looks cool. It's fun, and this worked out well, and I'm glad I got to practice another skill. Oil is awesome. I really encourage you guys to be able to get after it. I know it can look a little bit intimidating, and let me go ahead and pan here to the right. But I assure you, just like anything else, you just need to get in there and work with it and practice with it. Oil is very forgiving in the sense of pushing stuff around, but understand that if you want a really clean build, this is probably not the medium for you. But if you're looking to do realistic weathering and want a degree of control over your builds, I highly recommend that you give this a try. And hit me up with any questions you guys have about my setup. Again, a lot of this comes from just me reading Mike Rinaldi stuff, and I think that's a phenomenal starting point. A big piece of the Rinaldi books, if you guys just jump into them now, you'll read them the first time and you'll maybe understand 5% of them, and then come back 6 months later, you'll understand 20%. Come back another 6 months later, hopefully you'll hit 50%. But that's really been a good guide for me. I've been staring at his work for the last year and some change, and now I'm actually kind of putting it into practice. I don't want to sit on the benches and just, keep reading and looking. I actually want to use my hands and get after it, because that's the fastest way to learn. All right, y'all, that's it for the oil video. I hope you guys dug it. I put a ton of why in there, so I hope you got the larger gamut of why oils work and what the application is. If you like this video, I really appreciate it if you leave a thumbs up, and if you subscribe. My subs count has been going up, and that's really rad, and then I've been popping up on some other feeds and getting lots of cool comments, so I really appreciate y'all. I'd also appreciate too, I have a Patreon. It's completely free. You can subscribe to it at no cost, but if you like the work that I'm doing, if you like the stuff I'm putting down, I appreciate if you go over there and leave a little tip in the tip jar. You also too, I'm wearing the shirt this morning, you all can also get this pretty rad shirt, so Patreon's cool, really appreciate it. Purely optional. Keep sending you guys work in progress photos. I love a little side conversations that we have. It's awesome, keeps me very motivated, and I hope whatever you guys are working after, I hope whatever you guys are building, I hope whatever you guys are doing, you guys are making it macho. See you next time.